today, welcome to Watercooler Wednesday. This week, we are going to be discussing the changing regulatory tides in the US. So we had a number of different developments over the last week or two related to different kind of matters that indicate that maybe things are switching in the US as far as how we're viewing the regulatory environment here. Those include the SAB 121 overturn. We're not sure if that's going to go through all the way, but that's one development we saw. We also saw FIT 21, which again isn't written into law yet, but kind of demonstrates the bipartisan support that we're starting to see for the industry. And then finally, we had the Ethereum spot ETF approval. So the ETF hasn't gone live yet. There's still some hurdles there, but three kind of major developments that came in the last week or two that didn't really seem like they were with the tide of how things have been talked about recently. We have the SEC, who has been going after the Ethereum Foundation, as well as Uniswap, the Uniswap Foundation as well, kind of indicating how they're taking a hardline stance against the crypto industry. And it seemed like there was sort of this 180 that happened with the SEC. Now, it's been argued for a long time that it would have been really hard for the SEC to deny the ETH ETF approval just based on the fact that we have a futures ETH ETF already, which those of you who are familiar with it, the ruling against the Bitcoin spot ETF was struck down because there was an existing futures ETF, and they were like, you can't deny a spot ETF if you have a futures. So that could have likely played into it, but it seemed like there was a lot of talk about the fact that we thought that maybe ETH getting pegged as a security might allow the SEC to kick the can on this a little bit further, but that clearly did not happen. So some things that we can start to speculate on are, will some of those lawsuits that are out there right now, may those kind of get withdrawn or kind of swept aside? That remains to be seen. But I just wanted to give a quick overview on the three different things that happened, and just open up the discussion for everyone else on the call to say, where do we think we're going? Do we think that the fact that we have an election this year, do we think that this is what's turning the tide on this? Because we're starting to see it's a bipartisan. There's a lot of bipartisan support for this industry, and yeah. So I'll just go quickly through kind of the three main things, and we can talk about them as we go. If anyone has anything to add or any questions or anything like that, feel free to jump in, interrupt, raise your hand, whatever. Would love to get everyone's insights on this. So let's start with SAB 121. So so Congress has overturned SAB 121, and I think I don't remember the exact spread, but there was a lot of significant Democratic support, which was in defiance of Senator Warren's staunchly anti-crypto stance. So it seems like we're shifting in the political attitudes, because we had all of these regulations that were introduced by the SEC that were going to largely kind of hamstring the industry. And this was a step in the right direction of saying, hey, these are anti-business, these are anti-growth, these are and very staunchly anti-crypto measures that we want to push back against. So just give me 1 second. So just wanted to see if anyone out there has any kind of insights or comments on the SAB 121 stuff that happened last week, or was that 2 weeks ago?
I obviously don't know, a lot about that specifically, but what do you see as some of the long-term effects of this? Like the shift in the regulatory environment and just market dynamics because of this.
I think that this specifically, as it hasn't fully played out yet, and just for those of you who are unfamiliar with SAB, it's a staff accounting bulletin. So it's really like the accounting kind of treatments behind crypto. And you know, I do think that the overall kind of like tone shift is indicative of like a turning point that we're at. One of my colleagues, Michael Nadeau, who runs the DeFi report, he was kind of alluding to this turning point that we're in, where you're kind of like past the frenzy phase, which could have been seen as like the 2021 phase, with the bull run there. You have that correction from, you know, a lot of different scams being unearthed and things like that, and then you come out of that into this, you know, institutional adoption that we're seeing, and we're really starting to see a battle play out between like the banks and the major investment firms, because for a long period of history, though, they were kind of like making money together, but the crypto industry allows for the investment firms to leverage a whole new asset class that is growing rapidly. You know, ETH is a hugely attractive asset for large funds and companies like BlackRock, because with an ETF, they can start to, they have to hold the underlying asset, but when you can, when the act of holding the underlying asset allows you to generate a yield in addition to the fees that you're charging for that ETF, it's a hugely attractive asset to offer as an ETF. So, you know, while there was a lot of success in the Bitcoin ETF, I speculate that there's going to be a lot of success for the ETH ETF. Maybe not initially, maybe not on the outset, but yeah. So as far as the staff accounting bulletin, it's really hard to say at this point, because we don't know whether like this kind of repeal is going to go through. Although the White House has said that they won't veto that. So that was a shift in the stance from the executive branch. But I think that overall here, we're starting to see a shift. And I think the White House, which were, you know, pretty anti-crypto so far through this presidency, is starting to realize that this is very bipartisan. You know, really what SAB 121 was kind of like trying to, I guess, help with was, you know, assessing the technological, legal, and regulatory risks that are involved with the crypto markets, and, you know, protecting investors from that, and requiring, you know, safeguarding of crypto assets to be part of or those who do safeguard crypto assets, to have additional kind of like regulations on them. So as far as the FIT 21 bill, the goal of this was to really kind of help to stop the SEC's like enforcement, regulation by enforcement, which we've seen with, you know, them levying lawsuits against Coinbase, against Kraken, against Uniswap and the Ethereum Foundation as well. And in those lawsuits, I forget which one it was, but there was a recent one, maybe it was XRP, where it was found that they were basically falsifying evidence. And so you have this like major regulatory body that is trying to regulate by enforcement, but also coming up with and creating false evidence. So, you know, I think that the SEC is being exposed as a political organization, and I don't think it's a huge surprise that the shifting support towards the crypto industry by both sides is starting to come to light in them kind of allowing the ETH ETF to go through and those sort of things. So, yeah, wondering if anyone has any thoughts on FIT 21 or SAB 121.
So with the FIT bill, what are some of are there going to be like new opportunities because of this that we think, like at least from our standpoint in the industry, by, you know, regulating the SEC that way?
The thing that I am hoping for is a revision to some of the broker regs, because for those who are familiar with those, the broker regs basically, if they play out as they're currently written, they're effectively shutting out US participation from DeFi, just based on how the infrastructure of DeFi works. So for me, like these bills, while they're like, it's cool to see that, you know, progress is going in the right direction and support is going in the right direction. For me, it's more important that things that are already kind of in place and are set to roll out, like the 1099 DA reporting, that stuff I think needs to be addressed and revised, because it's just, you're basically kind of like limiting what the US participation can be in the crypto industry by putting these regulations in place. And it may be inevitable for DeFi to move in that direction, but it makes it very hard for these autonomous smart contracts, because you know you can sue the Uniswap Foundation, but if the Uniswap Foundation goes away, that DEX still can operate. Like there's not really, they created the code and they make updates to the code based on what the DAO votes on. And whether or not you think that the DAO is decentralized or not, or whatever, that's a different discussion. But ultimately, Uniswap can run without any outside support. You can't have updates, you can't have upgrades, but it can run, and the liquidity pools can run without any outside hands moving anything. So to say that you need to collect data on every user on a platform that's meant to be permissionless is kind of a big hurdle to overcome. And I think that the way that it will be handled in DeFi is just basically to geo-block US participation and say, if you're trying to access this portal from a US IP address, we're just not going to allow you to do it. Or they're going to ask everyone globally for KYC. And I think that what will happen in that event is that someone's just going to spin up a clone of Uniswap, which is very easy to do. The code is open source. And then everyone will just migrate to that, and it'll be an illegal platform. But if the code is running and you don't have a foundation to go after, then who are you going to penalize? So, some other kind of examples of what are happening in the broker regs are the way that they're currently written. If you wanted to spend Bitcoin at like Starbucks, for example, and you wanted to pay for a $5 latte, they would have to collect your social security number and your address at the point of sale. And so if you think about how ridiculous that is, like going in to purchase a coffee, if you wanted to spend crypto, you would have to effectively give up your very sensitive financial data. It's basically killing that aspect of this industry. So it may not apply to Bitcoin because Bitcoin's a commodity, but it may just apply to whatever hasn't been strictly identified as a commodity, which is everything else. But yeah, for me, these kind of developments are more about impacting what is already set in stone, which is, or what is already set in motion, like the broker regs and the rules around the 1099 because that stuff is going to hamstring the industry if they go through as is.
Taylor, just maybe one comment. The Starbucks example, I believe, is not correct, because retailers, people who are not primarily or principal in dealing with digital assets, but retailer, are exempt under the broker regs.
They were okay. I thought that because they are facilitating a transaction, that they now become like an intermediary that would be required to collect that information.
Correct. Under the general definition, they would be under there, but there's a provision in there which is -1A10 something under there, where they say people who are primarily on sale and do not deal with digital assets are not brokers under this definition.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so in that instance, it sounds like maybe there might be a loophole for people who are doing like just processing payments at a point of sale. but still, a big aspect of this industry is DeFi, which is, ultimately allowing for people to transact in a way that doesn't require permission. And, one of the most beautiful DeFi tools that I leverage, very, very frequently is lending and borrowing. You can post collateral and borrow without a credit check. And so when you require KYC for those aspects as well, you also open up the door to additional, I'd say, discrimination that can exist in traditional markets as well, because there's famous examples of people being denied loans because their last name is, Rodriguez or something like that, or appraisals on homes being drastically under what their market value would be because the people that own the home are people of color or things like that. So I think that introducing permission to the blockchain is completely against the entire ethos. So I'm hoping that the kind of shifting in the regulatory environment around this industry is going to lead to kind of more sensible regulation, because I'm not one to say that you don't need regulation in this industry, but I think that it needs to make more sense. And I think that the people regulating the industry have to better understand these tools and what they're capable of and what they are not capable of. Thank you for that clarity, Philip. I appreciate that.
Hey Taylor, it's Squeeze.
Hey,
I
Squeeze.
wanted to add, how's it going?
Good to have you
Good.
on.
Oh, nothing much. I just wanted to add comment with regards to the proposed regs, because I was in DC a couple weeks ago, and I spoke with the principal at PwC, who has a line of connection to the senior counsel of the U.S. Treasury. And I got to see the senior counsel of the U.S. Treasury speak in DC about the proposed regs and stuff. And from what I can tell, based on my discussions and from what I heard, the 1099 DA got released before they finished reviewing all of the comments. So I from what I've been told is that they may be making changes once they finish going through the comments, but there will be more clarity at the coming this year. The senior counsel who's been dealing with the proposed regs for crypto said that this year they're going to finalize the regs.
Okay. Very cool. That's awesome insight.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if they might limit the scope of who needs to collect this info, because, ultimately, I would, in my view, I think that it should be at the rails in and out of the industry. And I'm not sure how everyone else feels in this call, but for me, it's like, if you're pulling money, either, out of Coinbase and bringing it back to your bank, to me, that's something that needs to be, which is already being done through 1099 reporting. But to require this of effectively code, right? Like, or even there were some instances where like MetaMask would be required to collect this information. And to be fair, it is because MetaMask does offer like swap features through their wallet, and that was the reason why they would come under scrutiny. But you're basically creating this reporting burden and information burden to the IRS, because think about it. Like the vast majority of transactions in crypto would have to have these 1099 DA forms associated with them. So that's going to create billions of every year, billions of 1099 DA forms that need to be sent to the IRS. And so when you think of the reporting burden that's on these protocols, most of them are just smart contracts. There might be a foundation that helps to manage them and helps to kind of govern them via a DAO, but still, it's just code. So I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding here, and I think that it's important that the IRS is looking at the feedback that they got, because I think that they either didn't understand or they wanted to have such a broad net that they could walk it back and like have this ridiculous negotiating point to start from and then walk it back a little bit. I'm wondering what you guys think on that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, I think Brian just jumped some clarity in the chat. Yeah, so Brian looks like he found what Philip was referring to. What did he say? So 1.6045-1A10IC was revised to clarify that a person who acts as a principal in a sale will be treated as affecting sales only if that principal is acting as a dealer with respect to the sale that is subject to reporting under 6045. Thus, for example, a retailer who accepts digital assets from a customer as payment for the sale of goods is not affecting the sale of digital assets on behalf of that customer if that retailer is not otherwise a dealer of digital assets. So basically, if Starbucks isn't selling or like acting as an exchange, like if you can't go into Starbucks and buy Bitcoin from them or ETH from them, they're not a dealer, they're just receiving. So it looks like Philip was right on that clarification. So that's awesome. Thank you for posting that in here, Brian, and thanks Philip for clarifying that. So yeah, so
comes right off the Federal Register too, so.
what's that?
This comes right off the Federal Register.
Oh, okay, perfect. So so yeah, that makes this a lot. I mean, I was thinking that clarification was not in place. So to me, it was even more ridiculous to think that, you know, you wouldn't be able to buy a coffee with crypto and without having to give up your social security number. But still, you know, the idea of having to KYC before using a DEX is just, it's foreign to people who have been in the industry for forever. And that may be the way that the industry moves. But I think that there's going to be a lot of pushback against this. And I think that, as I alluded to before, I think that you'll just see clones pop up and people will be able to leverage a cloned version of Uniswap, you know, to accomplish the same thing. And then how do you regulate that when there's not a foundation behind it, or there's not a, you know, I think that it's going to create new types of products. And I think that you need to get more, you need to clamp down more on things that you can control, like the on and off ramps. But yeah. So I'm wondering if people think that we're going to continue to see some loosening in the kind of like stance that the White House is taking against crypto, now that we see that like Donald Trump is accepting crypto and he's kind of like opening his arms wide to the crypto industry. It seems like Biden is starting to change his stance on this because he sees that, you know, this can be something that moves the needle in a lot of swing states. Do you think that that's going to continue to happen, or do we see the White House continuing to kind of like maybe fence it a little bit here? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, we said before the House vote on the FIT 21, the White House issued a statement with a softer tone than a veto threat to the overturning of the SAB 121. So it looks like, it kind of looks like the White House is in sync with Congress.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because originally they were saying they were going to veto anything that related to this stuff, and so yeah, I mean, I think it was Nick Farrer who was telling me that, yeah, like you just said, right before right after this came out, they issued a statement that was saying that they would not veto it, or just that they weren't explicitly saying that they were going to veto it anymore.
So the administration. So they issued a statement that says the administration opposes the passage of HR 4763, which would affect the regulatory structure for digital assets in the U.S. So that's when was this?
Is that with SAB 121 or is that FIT 21?
FIT 21, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
51.
Well, what Brian just said was from SAB 121, but I think what they said they would not veto was the FIT 21. What I'm going to clarify that right now, but yeah, FIT 21 specifically, President Biden or the White House said that they would not veto that. But yeah.
I mean, I think when I look at like just the truth of the industry that we're in, it's at a point now, I think, where you just can't ignore it, you know, and it's like something has to be done. In previous years, maybe you could just, you know, skirt around it or just kind of push it to the side. If you're the government, if you're SEC, you know, whoever you are, I think you can. But I mean, the amount of money, the amount of transactions, the amount of individuals that continuously get into the ecosystem. So I'm hoping, to answer your initial question, I'm hoping that this continues to chip away at things, and it just kind of like domino effects into better policies, better, you know, regulation, better advancements, you know, for our country, for individuals, you know, and then ultimately for the industry and the globe, you know.
So some key things, just for those who are less familiar, that came out of FIT 21 were essentially give regulation through clarity, right? And so what they mean by that is like defining decentralization, which I think is huge for if we want to still use the Howey test for kind of using, which I think that the Howey test is outdated and we need to create a new test for digital assets. But you know, whether something is significantly decentralized or not is basically the deciding factor in a lot of those kind of thresholds, right? Because you need to be relying on a third party for profit under the Howey test, right? That's one of the stipulations. And if the protocol is significantly decentralized, then there's no identifiable third party. So I think that clarifying what significantly decentralized means. I think also I believe that FIT 21 was also basically advocating for digital assets to come under the CFTC, so the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, rather than the SEC. So which has a more favorable stance on crypto overall. So I think that those are kind of like the key things to understand about FIT 21. And then, yeah, so for me, I think that the biggest thing we need to do is just start to define what decentralized means in the context of blockchains, because, you know, it impacts, first of all, the SEC's suit against well, they haven't brought suit yet against the Ethereum Foundation. They had just issued a Wells notice. But if you are trying to say that Ethereum is a security, then you need to choose what basically you need to be able to prove that it is today, right? Because it doesn't matter what happened when ETH was initially like when the pre-sale was done or things like that, because it's a significantly different network than it was back then. And so, you know, having those definitions of what decentralized mean, what thresholds we have to make, and how do you measure it, right, are really, really key here. But those were the main things I wanted to talk about. We can get into a little bit more detail on SAB 121 because we haven't talked about the details on that yet. But basically there was, you know, the custodial responsibilities that it started to introduce, you know, crypto companies that would have additional regulatory and operational burdens, and then just accounting implications related to safeguarding clients' assets. So like if you're an exchange and you're holding clients' funds because they've deposited that, you shouldn't be able to keep that on your balance sheet. So it's kind of like alluding to the FTX debacle where they were basically including clients' funds on their balance sheet. That shouldn't be a part of your, because it's not your money, right? Basically, I think that we're moving in the right direction. I think that we do need regulation, but I think it needs to make sense for what the market is, and we need to protect the decentralized nature of the crypto industry, because that's where that's where all of the benefits come from. So those were my main thoughts. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add or discuss, but those were the things I wanted to talk about this week.
I think it makes sense. Now, maybe you can clarify a little. So we have the Bitcoin ETF, we have the Ethereum ETF. Does that mean more will be coming as well potentially, or does it like stop there? Or
I would think that for sure. I would guess that Solana would be up next, just because of the popularity it has. Solana is a lot less decentralized than ETH, but it doesn't seem like that would matter. Like securities have ETFs, so you know, I don't think that that's a disqualifying aspect of it. I think that it would be very profitable for these asset managers. So I think that having a Solana ETF is probably the next move. I've heard of companies like BitTensor potentially getting an ETF. But my guess would be Solana. It remains to be seen whether we'll get a meme coin ETF, but I honestly think that that's in the cards now. As wild as that sounds, we might get like a Dogecoin ETF or like a Shiba Inu ETF, maybe a Pepe ETF. But yeah, I think that this is kind of opening up the floodgates for pretty much any crypto-backed ETF. But we'll see.
does the process become easier the more there are, or it's kind of like just the same?
I mean, the process is the same. It's just whether or not the SEC continues to kick the can till the last possible date, like they have been. Because like May 23rd or May 24th, when the ETF got approved, that was they had kicked the can to the last possible time that they could, and so they had to give an answer, or they would have had to. I don't know if they would have been able to delay it further because, you know, they would have, if they had like initiated the lawsuit against the ETH Foundation. I don't know if that would have allowed them to continue kicking it down the line. I just don't know enough about that topic. But I do know that that was the last possible date for them to give an answer on it. So with both the Bitcoin ETF and the ETH ETF, they kicked the can as long as they could to provide an answer on that. So yeah, I think that if we start to see these all getting approved, I would expect eventually for it to get more streamlined. But again, it's hard to say with the way that the current SEC is structured with Gensler and team.